So, how does forwarding a few posts on social media lead to a prison sentence for a PhD scholar? It sounds wild, but that's exactly what happened to Chen Jingyuan in China. In this explainer, we're going to unpack this really fascinating case and what it tells us about law, power, and what a crime even means in our digital world. All right, so here's our game plan. We'll start with Chen himself and his so-called crime. Then we'll get into the official court verdict and, the huge arguments against it. From there, we'll look at this whole thing through a few different lenses on power to really understand the deeper story. And finally, we'll wrap up with what this case really reveals about the bigger picture. So, first things first, who is the person at the very center of the story? Let's meet him. Chen Jingyuan is a physicist, a guy with a PhD who's worked in super advanced fields like defense tech and AI. But that's not how he sees himself. In a letter he actually wrote from prison, he says he's an independent scholar. For him, life is all about learning, about gaining freedom and independence of the mind. And then his entire life just gets turned upside down. It all kicked off with something most of us do without a second thought, sharing stuff online. But for Chen, this led to a police raid, an arrest, a trial, and a prison sentence of nearly 2 years. And get this, his appeal was rejected without him even getting a hearing. So you have to be asking, how on earth did the legal system justify this? The court's reasoning is really the heart of the matter, so let's dig into that. Chen was charged under this law called picking quarrels and provoking trouble. It's famously vague, and critics often call it a pocket crime because, well, it's like a catch-all that can be used to punish pretty much any kind of speech the state doesn't like. And the real irony here, Chen himself had written about how dangerous this very law was. Okay, this is where the court's logic gets really wild. They didn't argue that he knew the information was false. No, their rationale was that because he had a high level of education, he should have known better. His own PhD was basically used against him as the proof of his guilt. It's a bizarre twist. And if you want a perfect snapshot of the prosecution's mindset, listen to this. This alleged quote from the prosecutor says it all. "I think it's a rumor, so it's a rumor. I don't intend to verify it." So, truth wasn't about evidence, it was just about what the authorities decided it was. Right, so as you can probably guess, the defense and a lot of legal experts afterwards saw some massive holes in this verdict. Let's walk through the two biggest arguments they made. The first huge problem is the whole idea of false information. I mean, what did he actually share? The defense argued that none of it even fits the legal definition of a rumor. I mean, look at this. A lot of the posts were just opinions, right? Political commentary. Some were cartoons, art. Others were just him expressing an emotion. He even shared posts from the official US Embassy account. And here's the thing. Legally speaking, you can't prosecute an opinion or a cartoon as false information. They're not statements of fact that can be proven true or false. But, okay, let's just play devil's advocate for a second. Even if the posts were somehow a problem, the law requires the prosecution to prove they caused severe public disorder. So what was the evidence for that? Well, the prosecution brought zero evidence. None. And when you see the numbers, you understand why. Chen had fewer than 100 followers, and a lot of them weren't even active. The total number of retweets was also less than 100. So the idea that this caused severe chaos in society, it just doesn't hold up. So if the legal case itself is this shaky, what's really going on here? To get a handle on that, we need to step back and look at this through a few different analytical lenses that show us what's happening beneath the surface. And our first lens might be the most surprising one. One analysis actually uses the writings of Mao Zedong to critique the court's decision, arguing that the verdict went against the core principles of the party's own ideology. It's a pretty stark contrast, right? You have this key principle, seek truth from facts, but the court just ran with assumptions. Then there's the mass line, which is about listening to the people, but the court totally ignored that. There were no public complaints. The law was basically used to protect the state's authority, not the citizen. Okay, another way to look at this comes from the French philosopher Louis Althusser. He would probably see this as a classic 1-2 punch from the state. First, you have the ideological apparatus, in this case the court, which writes a verdict that says these ideas are criminal, it persuades. Then comes the repressive apparatus, the police, the prisons, that uses physical force to compel obedience. But what if punishing just one person wasn't the only point? A third perspective, from the philosopher Michel Foucault, suggests that maybe the real target wasn't just Chen Jingyuan.
maybe it was everyone else watching. This is an idea called disciplinary power.
And this is the real kicker. This case becomes a public lesson. By making the rules unclear and using Chen's education against him, it sends a powerful, chilling message to other scholars and intellectuals. It forces them to become their own censors. The ultimate goal isn't just silence, it's to create a whole class of people who police themselves.
So, let's pull all these threads together. After looking at the facts and these different theories, what does the case of Chen Jingyuan really tell us? This one-man story really acts as a window into a whole system. It shows the danger of vague pocket crimes, how a legal system can value a political message over actual facts, and how easily opinion and art can be labeled false information. And of course, it shows the profound, chilling effect a case like this can have on academic freedom and free speech for everyone.
And that leaves us with one final and pretty unsettling question. When a legal system uses a person's education against them to punish the sharing of ideas, what's really on trial? Is it a crime, or is it the very act of thinking itself?